XFCE, a KDE user's perspective. So I've switched to XFCE for the last week and have been using it as my only desktop environment for that amount of time, switching away from KDE, and I'm here to give you my thoughts and conclusions and critiques of it. So this is XFCE. As you can see, it's at least from this image, it looks like quite a dated design for a desktop environment, but it's highly customizable and especially lightweight for a desktop environment. But we'll talk about that later. Some considerations. XFCE is clearly marketed as a lightweight desktop environment. So unlike GNOME or KDE, where it's marketed sort of to everyone and even people with more powerful hardware, XFCE is clearly stated for people who want to use something that uses less resources. However, it's still meant for general users, maybe just with slower computers, so older hardware and such. It adheres strongly to the free desktop standard, so basically a lot of the components in XFCE are separated, and you download a lot of packages to get all that stuff. It supports GNU Linux and BSD, so you can get XFCE on BSD. It's based on GTK 2 and 3, more on that later, and the UI is not as traditional as KDE, but more than GNOME. If you look over here, just back to the previous slide, you'll notice that it's not exactly super traditional like KDE, which just has essentially a Windows desktop with a meta key press to open up a menu and stuff. However, it's not like GNOME where it's completely abstract, where you have like a bunch of icons that it's a bit more like a Mac. So here's XFCE themed a little bit better, and as you can see, it's a very customizable desktop environment. You can modify a lot of stuff about it like KDE. So there's no Wayland support on XFCE, and this isn't exactly an issue for me. Wayland is quite rare in most modern desktop environments. Only the big ones support it, so KDE sort of supports that, and GNOME is fully going with it. Wayland isn't fully mature yet, so it doesn't really matter anyway, because people are still going to be using Xorg for most things, or using X-Wayland, so what's even the point? Wayland is nowhere near to full maturity and being able to be fully used. However, stay tuned and subscribe for my upcoming Xorg versus Wayland video. That's a shameless shill right there, where I'll go into this into more detail. So I'll make a video where I talk about the performance with Wayland and Xorg and whether it's actually worth it to use Wayland instead of Xorg, even when you're going to be running a lot of stuff under X-Wayland. So yeah. Now here's the thing that I liked about XFCE. It has a much smaller install size than KDE. So as you can see, it's 43.78 megabytes to install base XFCE and 51.23 megabytes to add all the other stuff, you know, the extra plugins for XFCE. So that adds things like, I don't know, the battery menu and weather and all that kind of stuff, and things like media controls. And so in total, that's less than 100 megabytes, and that's much smaller than KDE or GNOME, especially GNOME, which is quite larger. So that's the thing I like. So a smaller install size is useful if you have slower or unreliable access to the internet, which applies to a lot of people, especially when you have slower hardware. You're also likely to have a slower internet connection as well, so it makes sense to have a lighter desktop environment when it comes to size. It frees up space for more programs and files, and less data is less to deal with and worry about. When you have less files and less programs, then your system is less likely to break because you have less things to worry about, so that's just a benefit in having smaller programs. Another thing I liked is easy customization. Everywhere you click, there's options. Now KDE also has this, but XFCE seems more suited for it. So basically, you can click anywhere in XFCE and you get a lot of options and a lot of intuitive options too. So in KDE, for example, if I wanted to create, I don't know, over here it says create launcher in that image. To create a launcher in KDE, it's a little bit harder than just clicking create launcher. You have to go through a couple of steps. In XFCE, you can essentially just select a program and you're done. And this applies to a lot of other things as well, and it's much simpler. There's so many themes available too, so that's part of the customization. Very themable, because a lot of people with slower hardware love theming their computers. It's what Rising is sort of about. It's slower hardware, you theme it to make it look really good. Another thing I liked is low resource usage. XFCE uses far less resources than GNOME. Compared to GNOME, you have much less resource usage in XFCE because it's more minimalist. It uses, just generally less memory because it has less things to run. However, KDE is comparable on modern hardware, sometimes even faster. So KDE and XFCE have been compared in terms of memory and CPU usage, and it appears that they're sort of in a tie for a lot of stuff, so you might want to reconsider. Here's the first thing I disliked. Few animations. The point of a lightweight desktop environment isn't to have eye candy. However, KDE gets away with far more visually, and it uses a similar amount of resources. So KDE uses Qt and some different APIs, and it has, you can enable a lot of animations, a lot of stuff, and it still uses around the same amount of resources as XFCE. However, I will say I'm testing on modern hardware hardware. Maybe on older hardware there is quite a big difference, so that just may be me. XFCE feels a little weird and unintuitive. I'd like to say it feels dated, as like if I had to really conclude, because it lacks a lot of the basic animations that you'd expect. You don't get animations for a lot of stuff, or even just like guides for a lot of stuff. I know you can probably turn those on somewhere. Animations, though, I haven't really found a solution to that. So yeah, that's part of being lightweight, but when Plasma is able to get all that stuff done, and it doesn't, use a lot more resources, or sometimes even uses less, then that's like a sign. Another thing I disliked is virtual desktops. Moving windows between virtual desktops is odd. So for example, you move a window and you wanted to move it to another virtual desktop, you either select it in your pager, so that's a little mini version of desktops, or you have to drag it and then move it across your actual screen to the other desktop as if it was a different monitor, and that always screws you over because there's a margin between dragging it there and snapping it to the corner, or dragging it there and bringing them to the virtual desktop. So that's super annoying. The lack of animations make this 2 times worse because there's no visual explanation on how to do that. So that really caught me off guard the first time I started using XFCE. It's something I wanted to note here. Another thing I disliked, and this is a bigger one for me, GTK 2 and 3. So XFCE's programs, the desktop tools, the Thunar file manager, all that stuff, it's written in GTK 2. However, many modern programs and GUI tools use GTK 3. So something like GNOME, for example, gets away with being more uniform because it uses GTK 3, and GTK 3 programs are becoming more common. And KDE ditches GTK in favor of Qt, so you don't have that conflict because you can theme GTK as well to make sure it's color and make sure you have some level of consistency between your other APIs. But the difference between Qt and GTK is so clear that it doesn't really bother me, but something about having 2 versions of GTK on the computer and having different programs using different versions is just a little annoying. So anyway, look at this. It can look really nice. You can get it, it generally is sort of stylish if you know how to customize it, and it has a lot of cool features. But if I really had to be honest, I think XFCE is okay, but not as good as GNOME or KDE. So if I had to rank them, I'd probably put it at the lowest of my currently 3 desktop environments that I've reviewed. Meet me next time when I'm going to be doing something on either Deepin, or I'm going to be taking a look at Cinnamon. Vote on Discord if you want to join the Discord, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Goodbye.